All right, you guys hear me okay down there?
Oh, yeah.
All right, perfect. I'm glad. So it looks like the mic's picking up there and there, which is awesome. Hopefully it works well for everybody else. Let me see if I can do
He
that.
doesn't want me to have him in it.
Oh, I don't blame you. That's fine. It's not being recorded, so it's not going to go up anywhere later. I just see you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I just get to see you.
See, it's good to see you.
We're going to pick up and continuing the conversation about taking off the mask of perfection, being real, being authentic. And we're going to hop around a little bit in 1st and 2nd Corinthians today. We're not going to be really solidly in one spot, but that's where we're going to spend most of our time. But before we start and dive into this, I have a question. It's an exercise I like to do at work, so bear with me, okay? I want you to do a little bit of mental exercise. I'm going to ask a question, and the answers, you can just say it in your head. You don't have to say it out loud. You can write it down if you'd like, are I am blank statements, right? I want you to think of this question over a little bit and answer to the best of your ability. Try to keep track of about 5 in your head, okay? The question is, who are you? And the answers are I am blank statements. So think a few things up, and then I'll ask here in a second. If you're willing to share, we'll go from there. But I'm always curious where this goes. So about 3 to 5 is good. 10's too many. Unless you really want to go into it. I'll give us about 30 seconds, and then we'll see what we come up with. You got a few locked in there? I am somethings. What comes to mind first?
I'm a woman.
A woman, okay? I am not, but I'm glad you are. All right, what else? What else came to mind in that list?
I'm God's child.
God's child, okay?
I'm real.
Real, okay? How about out here? What was coming in your heads? There's no right or wrong answers. I mean, there are right answers and wrong answers, but in this exercise, there's no right or wrong answers.
Trustworthy or funny.
Trustworthy and funny, okay, I like that. What else?
Hard worker.
A hard worker, yeah.
Worker, provider.
Provider and worker, good. I'm a dad, always comes on my list. It's not on everyone's list, obviously, because
I am pregnant.
you're pregnant. Yeah.
I'm lazy.
Lazy. I always like
I said lazy, not crazy.
That's mine.
lazy. You can both be. There's no monopoly on these. You can all be them. It's fine.
These days, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So some of them are traits, some of them are characteristics, some of them are things you're born with, some of them are kind of life statuses or places you are in a period of time. I always love when people are like, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, I'm a this. It relates to your identity is what that question really is about. We said in the second time they're a child of God. Okay. When I do this exercise, even among Christian circles, that one's usually not number 1. And I don't know why. Right? What does it say? Not that we have to, start self-flagellating here, but what does it say when the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about who am I is maybe child of God or Christian isn't even in the top 5? What does that even mean? Does it mean anything? It's not.
Me being a child of God. Me being a child of God means a lot to me. Yeah.
Why didn't that come be one of the first?
Yeah.
It means if it's not in your top 5, it means that maybe you don't see that as one of your main attributes or as a huge part of who you are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big. I mean, that top 5 list, you have to be picky, right? And if it's not in there, maybe, and that's maybe not a bad thing necessarily, but it just means it's not as high as priority because we're tending to be in the here and the now in the moment, right? If I asked the same question like 3 hours from now, you would probably come up with different answers, right?
Yeah.
Mind you,
Right.
you already know the exercise, so it kind of ruins it, but if I had asked you at first time 3 hours from now, you probably have different answers because just in the here and the now, where am I at? Identity is a really big component in our culture people say, as a blank, I feel something, or as a blank, I think this. And it equates identity with a line of thinking or thought. And we're bigger than that. And this identity here, being a Christian, being a child of God, is an important one that really only starts to flourish once we take off the mask. So how do we take it off? Last time we talked about what it is and where it comes from. But how do you take off that mask of perfection when you're around other people, that genuine self can come out? How do you even start?
You have to feel comfortable.
You have to feel comfortable. Absolutely. How do you start to feel comfortable?
Usually you have some sort of relationship with them.
Yeah.
You're comfortable with them because you know that it's a safe environment. They know who you are. You know that you can trust them with stuff.
Requires relationship, and not just relationship, a healthy relationship. So let's go a little deeper here. What is required to even begin having a healthy relationship with someone?
Trust.
Trust. Time. Yeah.
Not be judged.
Huh?
Not be judged.
Non-judgmental. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The audience, we just hear mumble. We don't hear.
Oh yeah, that's why I was repeating the answers.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I figured you couldn't hear all of them, so. What else? To have a healthy relationship with someone.
Shared experience.
Shared experience is a big one. It's not monumentally important, but a shared experience can be something that happened in the past or something here in the now. The equation for a relationship is actually shared time, shared experience. You have to do both.
They have to be vulnerable back.
They do, right? Reciprocation, right? If you like lay your heart at somebody and they're like, cool. And then they walk away, you're like, that did not go how I hoped it would, right? Especially when you're trying to have a deeper relationship with someone, you share, you kind of put your heart out there, you're like, okay, here it goes. And they're like, that's nice. And then there's silence. You kind of go, what's happening? I don't know. Being open and honest is required for healthy relationships, but the only way to even get to that vulnerable state is also to be open and honest. So it's just catch-22, where it's like, to do the thing, to be healthy, you have to start the thing in the first place, which is terrifying. Let's be honest. It's terrifying to really show someone what's going on. Whether it's inside or outside the church, we have this veneer that we put on that we don't want to see people to see the cracks. We don't want them to see our vulnerabilities. And yet we know being vulnerable is what allows relationships to deepen in the first place. So it's like, who's going to go first kind of deal. These masks that we wear keep real deepness from ever occurring. So what have we become used to instead of being open and vulnerable? Yeah, the opposite, right? What is the opposite of open, vulnerable?
Quiet, reserved.
Superficial.
We keep ourselves quiet, reserved, superficial, shallow.
Fake it till you make it. Yeah.
Fake it till you make it. No, keep going. I don't want to cut you off. I just want to make sure they're hearing what you're
Yeah.
saying.
I think it gets me in trouble at work because a lot of times I am just very transparent about what I'm concerned about or what my fears are, and I think my boss sometimes is like, "Did you just say that out loud?" Like, because that's not who she is.
So at work especially, we have this worry about, really that question is, what are they going to think? One step out of my mouth. And sometimes we run the risk of being too transparent about something, what we're really experiencing. And there are situations where being super transparent probably isn't good, right? If you're in like a natural disaster with a child, right? There's a fire and they're freaking out and you go, I'm freaking out too, right? They need you, even if you are freaking out, to show that calm resoluteness. And that's not the same as being vulnerable. There's a time and a place for vulnerability, and we'll get to it later as to what the key element of that is. But there's also times and places where it's not great. What were you gonna say?
Shyness.
Oh, being shy and reserved? Yeah. We get used to being comfortable, right? It's comfortable because we can have safety and security, which makes sense. If we're not vulnerable, we're keeping things reserved, we're keeping things safe, we're keeping things hidden. And those are basic human needs. I don't know if you've ever heard of, some people call it Maslow, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very common, the pyramid. Have you seen this thing before? It's very common. The bottom layer is basic physiological needs. If you don't have those things, you're dead, right? Food, water, shelter, clothes, etc., protection from the elements. The very next layer, right above your basic human needs for survival and you'll die, is safety and security of those things. So we go to work, which provides money, a resource which provides all the safety and security, the food, the shelter, the house, electricity, all those things. And we go, if I say or do the wrong thing and step on the wrong person's toes, I'm gonna lose that thing.
Right.
And it's terrifying.
That's what's going on with me at work right now.
That's-
I share different political views than everybody else. I have to
Politics.
keep my mouth shut because it just gets me in trouble.
Yeah, politics is tricky, right? Because politics, people have equated it to identity when it's really not. It's about mind frame. And those are two different things. People have embraced it as an identity part, right? I'm a this thing. It's like, no, you're not. You ascribe to that belief. That's not who you are. That's a belief system you've attached to yourself. And people get in trouble and they fight over it. I remember way back when I was working at Blockbuster, so you can figure out how long ago that was. I had a coworker, this was like, I don't know, 2001, 2002. And we're just sitting around talking and I'm I think 20, no, I'm not 20. I was in my late teens and she was in her early 30s, I could tell. And she just looks at me, we're just talking, she goes, I could never be friends with someone who voted for George Bush. And I kind of look at her and I'm like, okay. Like, what does that even mean? Like, how you say I can't relate to someone who has this one tiny difference in their life, because it is a tiny difference when you really look at it. I mean, people say it isn't. I argue, and I have good reasons to argue it. It's really not a big difference. It's approaching the same problem from a different way. That's really what it's about. And I'm like, so you can't be friends with what, 53% of the country? That's what you're saying? Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, you're just going to write them off because of this one thing. And it doesn't create safety, right? Workplaces, it's terrifying. Because, like, am I in the minority here? Am I in the majority? People are kind of like sussing the waters out of, you wait for someone else to say something first. You're like, oh, thank God. Oh, I can talk about it now. All right. And you don't want to be the first person. Everyone else look at you like you're crazy. Because that's judgment. That's what they're thinking about me. So the starting point, if we want anything else to occur, to take off the masks, even for a second, is finding the strength to do so in the first place, which is not easy. One of the most significant barriers to taking them off is the opinions of others. We talked about that a lot last time, judgment. When you break down all the different reasons as why, it kind of comes down to judgment. Having some kind of value ascribed to us from someone else, their opinions, their thoughts. You're weird, you're ugly, you're this, you're that. Insert word here. Kind of the opposite of the I am statements. It's you are statements. Those are also identity statements, right? So they ascribe some kind of value or identity to us, and that hurts. The unsaid question that hide in waiting just before the surface of our decisions about what we should say, think, or do, or even wear sometimes, is how will this make me look in the eyes of others? Have you ever worn an outfit you thought was like awesome, and you show up somewhere and people just kind of go, what's happening here? Does that ever happen to you? Does that ever happen to you? No, of course not, because we're all stylish and sleek.
And at that time, I had a daughter who was very fashion coordinated. Dad, you're not going out like that. Those two colors don't go together, Dad.
Yeah, children can be very judgmental, as we discover in our lives. I remember this day I was a middle schooler, which is a great time to get complexes about what you think about yourself. And I thought I was dressed really nicely. My older brother, who at that time was a model, saw me at church later and is like, did you pick that out for yourself? I'm like, yes. He goes, you shouldn't have. And I'm like 13, 14, just crushed at this moment, right? Because I highly valued the opinion of my older sibling here, this close family, and I thought he had a good eye for things. And I'm like, well, I'm never choosing my outfits again. I'm just going to write that off and call it done. I'm going to have someone choose it for me. It hits us hard when you hit those core things that get deep. That question really hurts us. Psychology, the field I like to work in, suggests that the desire for validation is one of the strongest motivations known to humanity. We want people to look at us and go, we want it deeply. We do. This is why social media is so powerful, right? You see that little like or that heart or whatever that symbol is on whatever the thing is, right? And for the briefest moment, you go, that person was thinking about me and it feels good.
think maybe when you get older and wiser, you know, it's not a big deal. When I was his age or even a little bit older, I was so worried about what people thought about me. Now I'm at the age where like, I don't care. This is what I believe. If you don't like it, too bad, so sad.
I think there's a truth about what you're saying here. Let's repeat it here for you guys. Is as we age, a lot of us hit that I don't kind of care window of it doesn't matter as much. It doesn't matter. Yet there are certain situations where it still very much does, right? Like work. We're like, I don't care, but I have to care in some degree because there might be consequences attached to it.
Right. I get to the, I like do what I have to do
Yeah.
to stay employed.
Yes.
But
We towed that line of the bare minimum of what's appropriate, what's allowed in that sense. But then that question is still unasked is what are they going to think if I do this? It still guides, unfortunately, a lot of our decisions. I'm not arguing with you, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just human nature is we filter a lot of our choices in the moment through our audience. Our behavior tends to change depending on who we're around. If our behavior was 100% the same around everybody, you could maybe argue a good case that you purely have apathy about the issue, right? Like, I don't care, I'll do whatever I want. But if our behavior is different here versus here versus here versus here, part of it's the role we're in and the hats and what's appropriate versus one place versus another. But it's still a part of us caring about what's going on in that situation. And that's human. It's very human. We want people to appreciate us. We want people to value us. Even if it's not everybody, maybe it's just one or two people. We really, really want them to value us. I think of married relationships, right? You probably care what your spouse thinks about you. A little bit, right? But it's something we still have wrapped around in our relationships. And so maybe even at workplaces, is a common thing I do too. We try to steer conversations away from points sometimes. We don't dive into it, but we're like, oh, that's great. What about that fishing trip? Right? We just tangentially switch the topics because if the conversation goes where people are wanting it to go, they knew how they really felt, it'd be considered controversial, it'd be considered inappropriate, it'd be considered something. At my workplace, I work in the field of psychology and mental health, and there are a lot of things that I can't be 100% open about. And the good news is, though, is that I don't have to be open about those things to do my job well. That's one of the few caveats about it, is I can have this belief, but still do this work over here, and they can be separate. It hasn't come to the point yet where they're like making us sign sworn statements about values and beliefs. If it does, I'm out. Like, that's just too crazy. But there's a little bit of freedom in that. It still comes up with coworkers. It's inescapable in its entirety. And yet, so we crave this human approval and acceptance while dreading rejection, and oftentimes it keeps us from sharing something really important in our lives, the gospel. We're worried if they know this thing about us, they're not going to like us anymore, they're not going to be around us. One of my first jobs was at a car wash in Sandy, and my twin brother and I were both working there, and we were like little Boy Scouts, little goody two-shoes. We never swore ever. And the other guys at the workplace, it was also a lube shop, were like, how come you guys never swear? We're like, we just don't do this. Like, okay. So they started calling us Rod and Todd. If you recognize the reference from The Simpsons, I think that's Ned Flanders' children. And so they started calling us that, and we're like, we didn't get the reference because we didn't watch The Simpsons. We're like, I don't know what this is talking about. We're not allowed to watch that show, guys, but they kept calling us, like, what is that about? And so even in this weird kind of way, we were still kind of sharing the message in its own way. We were set apart, but that's the judgment part. They were making fun of us. It wasn't a good thing. They were making fun of us. So then, how do we find the strength to take these masks off? Knowing that being unmasked opens us to being ridiculed, critiqued, and rejected. Where do we start? How do we start finding any strength to do that?
For personal experience at the beginning, when I work, I got humiliated a lot because I'm a hypocrite, because I come to church and I do things when I work, so they throw that in my face a lot. I don't deal with that anymore. I established who I am, but I used to go to the bathroom and pray.
Yeah.
And pray, and then come out, and I was healed, just by doing that.
So at the workplace, you would get confrontations about things, and one of the ways you would try to manage that is you would go, you said, to the bathroom and pray?
That's a good idea,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good idea, yeah, because I don't wanna punch a person, I don't wanna do nothing.
You don't want to punch the
I
person.
don't wanna do something stupid, but I did,
So where did you find the strength?
praying.
Yeah.
In the bathroom, I went and prayed in the bathroom,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that guy.
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
So the answer to unmasking ourselves isn't really anything we can do ourselves. It's about going to something bigger than us and asking for help. Because the world tells us not to be authentic and genuine. It highly validates inauthenticity, right? It's crazy even now with the advent of Photoshop, right? If you look at any picture on any magazine, that is not a real person in the sense that that's what they originally looked like. It's not. It's been touched up, it's been cropped, it's been shaded, it's been this, they've removed blemishes. There was a model, she did a video of a before and after of a photo shoot, and just her with no makeup, and then the finished product. They don't look like the same person. If you saw this picture side by side, you'd be like, those aren't even related. Like, they're not even distant family. They're completely different parts of the world. And it's so fake. And the world values this fakeness above everything because it gets us that validation. Except for when the times of real authenticity comes up. People are like, wow, you're really real. People kind of see that light shine through, and it hits them differently when they're ready for it. If they're not ready for it, it's like, this is too much. They kind of back out. So let's look at an example, Paul. We just spent a lot of time looking at Paul. And we see his journey. Mind you, we got to see 20 plus-ish years of change happen in reading essentially a few hours worth of books. Right, you can read everything Paul wrote in a few hours. It'll be a long read. Your eyes would hurt afterwards. But you can see his entire journey in a few hours. It's 20 plus years. So he has a lot happening during this time. It's not an overnight process. But he seems to get the question, how will this make me look in the eyes of others, and just rises above it? He shows us time and time again in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Does anyone remember what was happening in those letters to the Corinthians? What was happening at that church?
Sexual sins.
There was immorality with sexual sins. Yep. Anyone else remember anything else about that church, those letters to that church?
Probably some idolatry.
Idolatry, yeah.
And if you go down the list, you're probably going to have immorality, idolatry,
Yep.
false teachers.
False teachers, immorality, idolatry. Yeah, those are the big three. Yeah, they had a false doctrine problem. Paul founded the Church of Corinth around 50 AD. He preached there. He was there for 18 months during his second missionary trip. And then he stayed there with Aquila and Priscilla. He went on his journey again. He received word from that church that things were not going so great. So he sent one letter. It got lost. We don't know what happened to that original letter. But then he sent two more, which is 1st and 2nd Corinthians, about 55 AD. And they detail the strained relationship Paul had with the church he helped found. They questioned his leadership and at times mocked his authority. How would you feel if you were in a position of authority at work and someone's mocking you? Real feelings, come on.
Anger.
Anger, yeah.
Crying myself to sleep.
You cry yourself to sleep, yeah. Really hurt? Right, positional leadership, people are questioning your authority, questioning your skills, mocking you. We got anger and really sad hurt. Is there anything else in that spectrum?
Oh, you're probably going to have revenge.
You want revenge? Is that what you said? Yeah, we got it at the same time over here. Some revenge! Dish it back! Right? Two can play this game. In the real workplace, when authority is questioned and it's derided or it's attacked, sometimes people try to keep the peace. This is very true in bureaucratic places. I used to work at Multnomah ESD for a little while, and for every teacher, there was like 3 administrators. It's just tons of bureaucracy. And whatever the system is, it's fine. But people would so easily get their feelings hurt if something was questioned because they had an idea, it was out there, they're in a position of authority, and then you have this subset of experts that are supposed to help them figure things out, and they make decisions without those people. So then they do the thing, people come in and saying, what are you doing? And in the workplace, in the world, a lot of time people will try to double down on the decision. They might try to compromise and make everything peace again. Rarely do they stand up for their original conviction. People usually buckle under pressure. So he doesn't try to create the right image of leadership to not step on toes. He isn't focused on keeping business as usual in the workplace or in these churches. He reveals to people questioning him how confused, upset, hurt, and weak he is. You ever have that experience at work? Right? Boss having a bad day and they just get real? Okay. I can think of maybe one time, maybe twice in all of my work where that's happened. People just get real. They don't do it. Why? And maybe they have it for you. I didn't give a chance to really answer. You had it happen?
Yeah. Generally, the reason why it doesn't happen, you want to seem weak or like over.
People don't want to seem weak or like a pushover, because being vulnerable requires some humility and honesty and openness about what's going on, including real feelings. And people get weird with feelings sometimes, right? Or no, they never do that. Ever. Right? Feelings change things, right? I had a job at Adventist, and I remember the first time I saw my boss cry. You could just feel everyone kind of like, what's happening? This is so weird. But it was good. It was a good moment, but it was intense at first because it immediately changed the tone of the space. This is vulnerability time. And it was weird until it wasn't. In 1 Corinthians 2:3,
It also happened in the family. My dad and had dad.
Yeah. Happens in families too, right? We see people with positions of authority who are supposed to be bedrock stones, and then they crack and they show their emotions and have to ask for help, which requires vulnerability too, and a lot of humility. Dads aren't supposed to show emotions, supposedly. So that's what I hear. I keep hearing all the time. Because we're not supposed to, men aren't supposed to show feelings. We don't have them.
That doesn't happen.
And then it's astounding parenting moment when a father does go to their kid and share a real feeling. They're like, oh, you're not a robot. Okay. It changes things. My dad, very great. He's much more emotive now in his older years and his grandkids. I think grandkids just completely changed him. But he described himself his whole life as having the emotions of a dead fish. That's how he described himself. I rarely saw much happening unless it was something funny. My dad would laugh his face off. But anything else, not much. And it was fine. But he would get vulnerable sometimes and it would change your perspective on things. In 1 Corinthians 2:3, Paul says about himself, I had it and then I lost it. 2:3. I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. Does this sound like a strong, resolute leader? In 1 Corinthians 15:8-9, he calls himself unworthy to be an apostle. He says, I am the least of these. In 2 Corinthians 11:5-6, he says he isn't skilled at speaking. The guy who's speaking in front of people all the time. Now, maybe he's reflecting on the times people started riots whenever he spoke. I'm not sure. But he says, I'm not good at speaking. Now, is he just doing pure self-deprecation for self-deprecation's sake? Like, I'm bad. Is that what he's doing? I see some head shaking, no? Do you know people who do this? Maybe it's yourself, and that's okay. We all do it at some point, where we put out something negative in hopes of what?
Someone will tell you it's not true.
Someone telling us, no, that's not true. You're great at that, right? What are we trying to do?
For compassion.
We're hoping for there to be compassionate, right? We want that validation. I don't think Paul is validation seeking when he's doing this. I think he's being genuine and being open. Which is not easy. He's sending a letter, think about this, to an entire church that he helped found, who are now questioning his authority. He goes, yeah, you're right. I suck at some things. I'm not good at this part of my job. I'm not nearly as great as others guys, and that's okay. And honestly, I have my weaknesses too. It's not like a lay off me guys thing. It's a you're right, let's figure this out thing. How can he be so honest and care so little about the mask? How can he let that go so easily?
Wants to have someone help him.
He wants help? I like that, yeah. What else?
Try to make a connection.
He's trying to make human connection. Yeah.
If you're gonna talk to somebody, in a sense, you don't have to get down to their level, but you have to have that common ground, or they're not gonna wanna listen to you anymore.
Can you imagine if you wrote the letter saying, you guys are a bunch of knuckleheads? What are you doing? You're idiots. How could you? I taught you better.
Yeah.
Right?
Things we say to our kids all the time.
Yeah, things we tell our kids all the time. Yeah. I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. Right? He didn't do that in his letter. He addressed the issues in a healthier way by being vulnerable himself first, modeling the behavior he wanted. In 1 Corinthians 4, 3-4, he says, "But to me it is a very small thing that I may be examined," in other words, there might be judged by you, "or by any human court. In fact, I do not even examine or judge myself, for I am conscious of nothing against myself, and yet I am not by this acquitted, but the one who examines me or judges me only is the Lord." His conscience is clear because there's only one court that matters to him, the eternal one. That's it. That doesn't mean he can say whatever he wants all the time and not hurt feelings, okay? What he's saying is, even in this process of being open and honest, I'm not worried about what you think about me, because the only person who can truly, truly judge me and whose opinion I value is one person, it's God. The question of how will I look in the eyes of others has no power over Paul. Even in his own opinion, doesn't drive him. He says, I don't even judge myself. It's only the Lord's domain. Really think that through again. He doesn't even judge himself, right? How many times do you judge yourself in a day? Constantly, right? Like, we're doing it all the time. You get out of the shower, you look in the mirror and go, oh no, what's happening? Right? I look in the mirror to shave and I'm like, oh, there's more gray. Okay. Which I kind of like. It helps in my field to look older because people don't think you're a nincompoop and don't know anything. So it kind of helps. But it's like, it's a surprise, like, oh, there it is. Okay, cool. But we are constantly judging ourselves, right? We make an innocent mistake. What's the thing that pops up in your head when you make an innocent mistake?
I'm going to be judged by it.
I'm an idiot.
I'm an idiot, right? We judge ourselves. Other people are going to see it. We look around like, oh, how many of them saw it? But also, first thing that pops in is usually, that was so stupid, or I'm stupid, I'm an idiot. We usually do I am statements, not that thing was dumb or that choice was dumb. We internalize it to our identity. I'm blank. Usually not a good thing. We are constantly judging ourselves. And Paul's point here is trying to home in is that's not even our purview to do so. Only God should be the one to do that. He, the Lord, is the only one that matters. And of course, we want the approval of others, and our decisions are shaped by that often. And does this mean we can say and do whatever we want because you shouldn't care what other people think? Just be free, say whatever's on your mind anytime?
No,
I don't think so.
not so much.
Because we're also called to be good witnesses, to be set apart, to have those fruits of the Spirit, to be kind and gentle, compassionate, and giving. There's a place and a time for being blunt and direct, but it's always supposed to be out of love. 2 Timothy 1:10 says, He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of His own purpose and grace. Nothing we did. It's not our place to say, I'm great because I'm great at things. The only reason we can take some comfort in taking the mask off in the first place is because we only have one real judge. The strength of being a mask comes from outside of us. It comes from God. It's woven throughout 1 and 2 Corinthians, right? God is the one who declared Paul righteous. This is his identity that he's chosen for us, righteous. The almighty, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient God says we are righteous. How can we put anyone else's opinion above that? Right? The opinion of one God is infinitely heavier than the opinion of 7 billion people. Yet, we keep turning towards the 7 billion people. I'm realizing we're about out of time here, and I have so many more pages to go that I haven't gotten through yet. So we'll continue this conversation next time about how to keep taking this off. I want to encourage you guys this next week. The strength to be authentic and be real isn't just something we choose to wake up in the morning and do. It comes with praying in prayer, asking God for that help. And oftentimes he grants it when we ask him for it. And it's yucky, it's messy, it's ugly, and that's okay. How many people of you guys did the Genesis process here when it was still going on? When you did, I did it, right? Was that super fun?
Hard work.
It was hard work, right? It was messy and ugly and junk comes out of it, but it was also real and genuine and authentic. I still have my book from the whole thing. I kind of thumbed through it once in a while, like, wow, I did a whole lot of work there with those people who I very much value and trust. It requires vulnerability to make those changes. And we get that first and foremost by just going to God and being like, help me please with this, okay? So even as we go there, talk to someone today about something a little bit more real. Don't be like at the grocery store. This is my favorite thing ever, okay? You laugh already because you know where it's going, right? You ever been in the line and someone says, how you doing? Great, how about you? And they go, I've been having the worst day ever, right? And they just start laying out everything wrong in their life and you're like, what is happening, right? And you want to be polite, you're like, that's great. Everything's bagged, I'm paying, I'm leaving now. Can we get on with it? Right? They're being vulnerable because for them in that very moment, it felt right time and place because for some reason, how it was reciprocated felt genuine, right? It felt like a real invitation instead of just maybe common courtesy. Or they have bad boundaries. It's one of the two. It's one of the two, okay? I've seen both, okay? But sometimes it's one or the other, maybe it's both. But there's a time and a place for that too. And church is supposed to be one of those times and places. When you're talking to people, when you're around people, when you're with people, you care. Okay. I'll pray and wrap us up here. And we can go on with our next part of worship. Heavenly Father, thank you just for this day. Thank you for your wonderful word and example of Paul, who is a pristine example of what it means to take off a mask, from going from Pharisee to apostle and preacher. I pray as we go about our day that we can reflect upon your word and just take it to heart and take that extra, just tiny step to be a little more genuine today. In your name I pray. Amen.